So you want to know about print runs? Stay tuned to the video. This content is sponsored by BCW Supplies. Visit them at bcwsupplies.com. So for whatever reason, I get a lot of questions from people about print runs and what makes for a big print run, what makes for a short print run, the sources that I go to for print run information that are credible sources. If you name it about print runs, I probably have gotten a question about it, which I think is fantastic because it gave me the motivation to create this video in which I'm going to talk about print runs and sources of print runs and also why you have to be careful when it comes to making decisions based upon print run information. So let's dig into some of the details. There are three main sources associated with print run information that I'm aware of, and there may be more out there, but the three that I'm most familiar with in order of familiarity is Chronicon.com, ICV2.com, and comicbookpage.com. Those are essentially the three resources that I've identified as having, I guess, reliable print run information, with the first being Chronicon. That's probably the best well-known. It is probably the most respected, and it's also the one that Diamond itself actually points people to if you have questions about print run and distributor information. When it comes to print run information, I like to think of it more in terms of estimates than absolutes. And there are lots of reasons for this, but I have worked in several different industries, and for whatever reason, distribution data is always a little murky, if not a little suspect. And sometimes it's purposeful, sometimes it's a reflection of just limited ability to pull together this information. But for me, I will never hang my hat on distribution data because distribution data is always full of caveats and what ifs and maybe a little of this, maybe a little of that. So as you look at the resources that I just mentioned, you definitely want to be aware of some of the caveats, and you don't want to take any of this as an absolute, right? So if it says that 100,000 of something were produced, it could be 120 or 80,000. Just look at it in terms of general estimates that is maybe directional versus an absolute assurance of that thing. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about some of the caveats that exist around sales data. Now, what's important to remember here is that depending upon the data aggregator that you actually go with, they could have additional caveats. So you want to make sure that you look at the fine print for the data aggregator site that you reference, because they could have some slightly different rules than the ones that I'm going to tick off for you now. So one of the first caveats that I want to talk about is around reorders. So when comics are sold and distributed by Diamond, in the month that they are sold and shipped, that's where their numbers are included in the totals. So for example, in the month of April, if 100,000 orders go out, 100,000 issues are reflected in the sales data. Now let's say that some shop or a number of shops reorder that same book in the following month or a subsequent month for some reason or another, and they order another 100,000. You will never see that additional 100,000 copies that are ordered. You will only see the original in the month that the book was originally sold and shipped. Now that's a very extreme example, but it's just to paint a picture of the fact that reorders in subsequent months are not captured regardless of their size. So another important caveat to remember is that comics that are sold and shipped outside of North America are not reported. It's estimated that the UK, for example, adds an additional 10% to all reporting numbers. Now, what this means is that you could have 100,000 comics that are shipped in the United States and Canada. Another 10% go to the UK. So that's 10,000 comics that are never seen in the totals that are reflected in print runs. You could have additional copies go to Germany and Spain and Australia, also at 10,000 a pop. You would never see that additional 50,000, 40,000 comics that are shipped outside of North America in the totals that you're looking at. So that's a big caveat that you should be aware of, is that the data aggregators may only show North American distribution numbers. Another important caveat to think about is that comics that go outside of local comic shops are also not captured in the totals that are seen. So books that are sent to newsstands or bookstores or postal subscriptions are not reflected in the totals that are seen. So if you have a major retailer, like, let's just say that Borders or Walmart or whoever it is orders a significant number of comics, those numbers are not potentially seen in the data that you're looking at. And to that point, you could have a major retailer like a Loot Crate that purchases a significant number of comics for distribution via its mail service program that would also not be seen. So they could purchase, and I'm making this up, 50,000 copies of a given book. You may never see that 50,000 number reflected in the sales data. And remember that your variance, your ratio variance, are based upon what's actually shipped. So if you are basing your decision to buy a variant based upon the ratios you're seeing could potentially be much lower than the reality based upon how books are being distributed, who they're going to, etc., etc. So these are all, again, some important caveats to kind of keep in mind, but by no means is this the extent of them. There are so many more caveats that could have been put into this video, but it would be really onerous to do so. But this is why I tell you, sales data, distribution data should be used for directional purposes only, and not as an absolute assurance because of the many caveats that exist around this data. But hopefully this answers some of the questions that you guys have out there about sources of information for distribution data and also the reliability of some of that data. I look forward to reading your comments in the comment section. And certainly if you guys want to reach out to me, feel free to do so at regiecollects@gmail.com and regiecollects on Instagram. Take care.